The film takes us to the abbey in Romania, set in the year 1952. Inside, a young nun named Victoria is walking down a dimly lit corridor with an older nun. The older nun holds a key, the significance of which is yet to be revealed. Nearing the end of the corridor, the older nun unlocks a wooden door bearing an ominous sign that reads, "God ends here." With unwavering resolve, the older nun crosses the threshold. Left alone, Victoria kneels in front of the open door and prays for protection. A few moments pass, and the older nun returns, her body covered in blood. Holding the key in trembling hands, she gives Victoria a solemn instruction: she must not let the demon overcome her. Moments later, an invisible force from within the room pulls the older nun back. In a panic, she runs into a room at the far end of the corridor and slams the door shut. Burdened by her desperate decision, she grabs a rope. She asks for forgiveness from some higher power for the sin she is about to commit. Holding the key tightly, she wraps the rope around her neck. As she glances over her shoulder, the demonic nun named Valak slowly approaches her, and now has the symbol of the cross upside down in front of her. In her final moments, Victoria commits suicide by jumping. Later, we introduce ourselves to a young man named Frenchie who delivers goods to the monastery. He sees Victoria's rotting body hanging lifelessly. Meanwhile, in the sacred halls of the Vatican, high-ranking officials of the church gather to discuss this tragic news. Father Burke is informed of Victoria's death and is tasked with investigating her death. He also has to check whether the monastery premises are still sacred, as the church considers suicide an unforgivable sin. They give him important information about the person who discovered Victoria's corpse. They also recruit a young novice named Irene to assist him in his search for answers. He visits the monastery and convinces Irene to accompany him. Briefly explaining to her the instructions of the church, he ensures that they are both in agreement in their mission. They arrive at Frenchie's home where they hope to find more clues. In Irene's presence, Frenchie immediately begins flirting. "Well, do I have any news for you?" Trying to make a charming impression, he introduces himself by kissing Irene's hand. However, Father Burke reveals himself to be a priest and Irene a nun. Undeterred by Frenchie's initial reluctance, Father Burke requests him to guide them to the abbey. Frenchie hesitates, but when Irene requests him personally, he immediately agrees. Hours later, Father Burke, Irene, and Frenchie finally arrive at their destination. Their first task at the abbey is to find Victoria's body. Frenchie places the body in an ice room to prevent it from rotting. The room was normally used for deliveries. There is a door for the nuns to take them in without coming out. Inside, they come across Victoria's lifeless form, sitting in horror. Father Burke carefully examines the body. He finds the key in her hand. The three bury Victoria outside the monastery, making sure she gets a proper funeral. Then they go inside the monastery. They see traces of Victoria's blood on the floor. The blood still looks fresh despite the tragedy having occurred several weeks ago. As they walk through, Irene's sharp eyes catch something amiss. A shadowy figure is lurking. She addresses the mysterious presence. To their surprise, the figure reveals herself to be the monastery's highest authority, the abbess. Father Burke tells her that they have come to find answers about Victoria's death. She urges them to come again tomorrow when the nuns' silence will break and answers will be found. Until then, she offers them a place to rest, a place to stay within the convent. Meanwhile, Frenchie walks back home through the dense forest on his way. A ghostly figure emerges, disguised as a nun. It is none other than Victoria, the ghost nun. Frenchie, he decides to follow her. Suddenly, the ghost nun reappears hanging from a tree in front of Frenchie's eyes. Terrified, he falls to the ground. He is attacked again by that entity, but he snatches a cross from the cemetery and manages to escape. Back at the convent, Irene tells Father Burke about her past. She remembers several visions that have been haunting her. He explains that he was entrusted with the care of a young boy named Daniel, who was himself plagued by visions. In an effort to free Daniel, Father Burke performed an exorcism. His efforts were successful in driving out the evil spirit that was possessing Daniel. However, Daniel suffered serious injuries as a result of the exorcism and died the following day. The burden of guilt still weighs heavy on Father Burke's shoulders. Later that night, Father Burke is awakened by the sound of music suddenly blaring from the radio. Using flashlight, he follows the source of the sound. Puzzled, he goes to check on Irene, who is sleeping peacefully. Then he notices a fleeting figure, a little boy, running out of the room. The father follows him through the rows of clothes. The boy looks back, and his face reflects something that looks strangely familiar to Father Burke. Could it be? The ghost appears to be Daniel's ghost. Their pursuit leads them to a cemetery. As Father Burke approaches, a serpent-like form emerges from the boy and pounces on him. Terror courses through Father Burke's veins, but fate betrays him, causing him to fall into a coffin. He is promptly buried. Meanwhile, Irene finds herself alone in the convent, her path lit by only a lamp. Searching for Father Burke, she hears the sound of the church bell and follows it. At the forefront stands a beheaded Christ and a group of praying nuns. Suddenly, a nun's ghastly shadow slides across the convent walls, beckoning her to follow them. To her amazement, the group of nuns disappears. Then, in a chilling moment, Valak's terrifying face appears before Irene. Though she is scared to death, she resumes her search. She uses her divine powers to locate Father Burke's grave. As the poor man rings the bell inside to make his presence felt, Irene quickly grabs a shovel and digs it into the ground and pulls him out before the spirit inside attacks. The next day dawns, and Father Burke and Irene head to the abbey to get answers. However, Father Burke stays outside while Irene goes inside, as she is in seclusion. In the halls of the abbey, Irene is greeted by Sister Ona, who tells her the history of this ancient place. She explains that the abbey was built centuries ago by a powerful duke during the Dark Ages. But there is more to the abbey than meets the eye. The duke built it as a gateway to hell. Through this gateway, an evil being was able to enter the realms and wreak havoc on earth. Just then, a brave band of Catholics arrive at the abbey to stop the evil duke. With the help of a relic filled with the holy blood of Jesus, they managed to close the gate. The Catholics established a sacred tradition of constant prayer as a protective wall so that no evil spirit could escape through the gate. Unfortunately, the ravages of war opened the gate once again. Sister Ona further explains that the demon Valak roams the corridors disguised as a nun. Just then, Sister Abigail interrupts their conversation. She urges Irene to go outside, but the gates leading outside were already closed. To stay the night, the nuns take her to Victoria's room. Meanwhile, at the entrance of the monastery, the abbot suddenly informs Father Burke that they must go back because Irene is probably lost. Suddenly, the abbot's head droops and she appears unconscious. Father Burke, obliged to investigate further, cautiously approaches the motionless abbot and tries to lift the curtain. Immediately, the abbot's demonic hands lunge towards them. Reacting instantly, Father Burke grabs the demonic hands and shatters them. He then sees a figure and follows it, which leads him to the delivery room. There, Sister Victoria's zombie suddenly attacks him, but thankfully, Frenchie arrives just in time and saves him. For a person who is involved with paranormal activities, he is certainly often saved by others. Well, inside the monastery, Irene wakes up from a nightmare. Looking around the room, she sees a nun nearby praying fervently. However, in an instant, the nun dissolves into thin air, revealing the menacing presence of Valak standing behind her. Suddenly, her doors open and she hears Sister Ona's voice. Driven by curiosity, she rushes out of the room. Determined to find the origin of the voice, she follows a path that leads her to a rickety wooden door with the words "God ends here" written ominously on it. Valak, with his grotesque face, appears from behind, sending a shiver down her spine. Terrified, she tries to flee. Without warning, Valak lunges towards Irene, desperate to get the key she has. In a brief moment of bravery, she manages to break free from Valak's clutches and escapes, saving her life. Suddenly, a hand snatches her wrist. It is Ona, whose face is filled with worry, who has come to her aid. She immediately instructs Irene to take refuge in the chapel and join the other nuns in prayer. She hurries to the chapel and finds another nun praying in Latin. A lifeless body lies nearby wrapped in a cloth. When she removes the cloth, she is shocked to see it is the lifeless form of Ona, holding a cross in her cold hands. Soon, a group of nuns enter the chapel. Irene stands firm while the evil force wounds her and carves a demonic mark on her back. As the situation grows dire, Father Burke and Frenchie enter the chapel, causing the evil spirit to vanish into thin air. Irene tells Father Burke and Frenchie about the presence of praying nuns, but as it turns out, she was alone from the start. The nuns have been part of her visions. They approach the lifeless body lying at the end of the chapel. To their surprise, Sister Ona's body is an old rotting corpse. The last nun left in the abbey, Victoria, has also met a tragic end. They realize that her death was not a suicide, but a sacrifice to foil Valak's plans for possession. As the pieces of the puzzle fall into place, they finally realize that the abbey is no longer holy. The symbol of the upside-down cross, the figure of the beheaded Christ, and Victoria's blood all point to the same assessment. They decide to seal the door before leaving. However, these events have strengthened Irene's faith in God even more, so she decides to take her vows. Frenchie doesn't seem too excited about the idea of Irene becoming a nun. In the next scene, they search for the relic. Father Burke's keen eye catches something peculiar. The hands of the statue of Mary seem to be pointing to something, which ignites a spark of realization in Irene. Now her visions make sense, Mary is pointing to them. They use Victoria's key to unlock the secret chamber in which the elusive relic is hidden. As the door opens, their eyes widen with awe and amazement at the sight of the relic. Without hesitation, Father Burke removes it and hands it to Irene. Taking the relic, they head for a wooden door that says, "God ends here." Determined, they carefully separate and explore their surroundings in search of the door. There is tension as the threat of a demonic encounter looms with every step they take. Once inside the room, Irene inadvertently steps on a mysterious symbol, and to her horror, it suddenly glows, causing her to scream. Terrified, she tries to escape, but a group of nuns with hidden faces block her path. The demonic nuns gather and trap Irene. Meanwhile, Frenchie, determined to locate Irene, searches for her. Eventually, he discovers that she must be behind a certain door. Mustering up courage, he opens the door, where he is confronted by a terrifying group of demonic nuns. He instinctively backs away, tempted to leave the room. However, in the midst of his panic, he hears Irene's pleas for help. He now has no choice but to help her. He walks forward through the group of demonic nuns. In a tense moment, the demonic nuns move apart and reveal Irene in an unnatural pose. Frenchie carefully uncovers Irene's face, only to realize she is under Valak's control. Without warning, Valak launches a brutal attack on Frenchie and calls her a Frenchman. Using perfect comic timing, Frenchie retaliates and declares himself a French Canadian. Frenchie quickly grabs a relic containing the holy blood of Jesus Christ and quickly rubs it on Irene's face. Miraculously, the holy blood serves as a powerful weapon against Valak, and expels the evil spirit from Irene's suffering body. However, just as Frenchie wins, Valak counterattacks, tightening his grip on her throat until she becomes uncomfortable. At the same time, Valak's rage reaches Irene, and she lets out a bone-chilling scream that knocks her into a nearby pool of water. Meanwhile, Father Burke runs down the corridor, desperately trying to reach Irene. Suddenly, a snake summoned by Daniel's demonic presence coils around Father Burke's neck, tightening its grip. In a desperate attempt to free himself, Father Burke grabs the snake, but in the process, the snake sinks its venomous fangs into his eyes. He manages to break free from the snake's clutches. Gasping, he quickly reaches Irene near the pool of water. The pool's dark depths begin to stir, revealing the horrifying face of Valak, which slowly emerges. Without warning, Valak swiftly submerges Irene in the water. To counter Valak's evil, Father Burke passionately prays a powerful prayer. However, Valak's shrill scream causes Father Burke to be thrown into the air and crash into the wall. Meanwhile, Irene places a relic containing the blood of Jesus Christ in her mouth. As Valak lifts her up, Irene defiantly spits the holy blood into Valak's disgusted face. Eventually, the door grabs Valak and drags the evil creature away. On the other hand, a victorious Irene remains submerged and struggling at the suffocating depths. Just in the nick of time, Frenchie arrives, determined to rescue her from her watery grave. Frenchie promptly revives her with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and does his best to revive Irene. Slowly, Irene regains consciousness, her eyes fluttering open. Frenchie apologizes to Irene and explains that his actions were simply a rescue act, a non-romantic gesture to save her life. In gratitude, Irene thanks Frenchie, who reveals his name is Maurice, for his efforts to save her. In the next scene, we find ourselves at the Abbey, where Father Burke, Irene, and Maurice are preparing to leave in a carriage. However, just as they are about to leave, Maurice's hand instinctively reaches for the back of his neck. He is marked with an upside-down cross on his neck. 20 years later, we find ourselves in a lecture room where Carolyn Perrin is watching Ed and Lorraine show exorcism footage. Maurice is possessed by Valak, and Lorraine is trying to exorcise him. In this way, it connects to the other Conjuring films and introduces the origin story of the demon Valak. The pieces of the puzzle begin to fit together when we learn that Morris's role as a world traveler plays a key role in Valak's sinister plans.